He fell into a ravine with his horse, and the Apache matriarch took him in to train their young. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's begin. The sun hung low over the rugged terrain of the American West, its golden rays casting long shadows over the dry, cracked earth. The wind carried the scent of sagebrush, and the sound of distant hooves echoed through the canyon. A lone cowboy, his name was Jacob, had been riding through the unforgiving landscape for hours. His horse, a sturdy chestnut mare, had been struggling under the hot sun, but Jacob pressed on. His mind was clouded with the weight of his thoughts. He had been on the trail for days, searching for a herd of cattle that had strayed too far from the ranch. As the sun began to set, Jacob's horse faltered, its legs buckling under the strain. Before he could react, the horse stumbled, dragging him into a deep ravine. The ground beneath them gave way, and both horse and rider plunged into the rocky depths. The fall was brutal, the world spinning as Jacob collided with the jagged rocks below. Pain shot through his body, but somehow, he managed to remain conscious. His horse, too, was hurt, its leg pinned beneath a large boulder. Jacob's heart raced as he struggled to free himself, his limbs aching from the fall. The pain was overwhelming, but he knew he had to act fast. If he didn't get out of the ravine, he and his horse would be doomed. Just as he was about to give up, a voice called down from above. "Hold on there, stranger." The voice was calm, yet commanding. Jacob's vision blurred as he looked up, unable to see who was speaking. "We'll get you out." A group of Apache riders appeared at the edge of the ravine, their faces painted in war colors. At the front of the group was a tall, imposing woman. Her eyes, sharp and wise, met Jacob's, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. She was no ordinary Apache. She was a matriarch, a leader of her people. With great care, she and her warriors descended into the ravine. They worked quickly, freeing Jacob from the rocks and tending to his wounds. Despite the pain, Jacob couldn't help but feel a strange sense of gratitude toward them. These Apache had saved his life, and for that, he would forever be in their debt. As the matriarch looked at him, her gaze softened, but there was something else in her eyes, something more than just compassion. "You are fortunate, cowboy," she said. "I will take you in, but know this, you owe us now. You will stay and learn from us, help train our young, and in return, we will teach you how to survive in this land." Jacob, still groggy from the fall, nodded weakly. He had no choice but to accept. Little did he know, this was the beginning of an extraordinary journey, one that would change the course of his life forever. Jacob awoke in a small, dimly lit shelter, the smell of smoke and herbs filling the air. His body ached from the fall, but the pain was nothing compared to the gratitude he felt for being alive. He blinked slowly, adjusting to the light, and saw the matriarch standing nearby, her posture strong and commanding. She was watching him closely, her eyes sharp, as if sizing him up for something. As his gaze met hers, she gave him a small, knowing nod. "You've survived the fall," she said softly, "but survival here means more than just staying alive. It means adapting." Jacob nodded, still too weak to speak, but he understood. He had been rescued, and now he was part of something larger, whether he liked it or not. "I will teach you," she continued, "how to survive in the ways of the Apache. You will not be a burden. You will learn and become one of us." Jacob's thoughts were a whirlwind. He had been on his own for so long, traveling the wide, desolate expanses of the West. He had never imagined finding himself in a place like this, surrounded by Apache warriors who had saved him. As days passed, Jacob slowly regained his strength. The matriarch kept her promise, guiding him in the ways of her people. Every morning they would rise early, the sun just beginning to touch the horizon, and practice survival skills. Jacob learned to track animals, to hunt, and to move silently through the wilderness. The matriarch's lessons were rigorous, but there was wisdom in every word she spoke. "The land speaks to those who listen," she would often say. Jacob took her words to heart, gradually becoming more attuned to the rhythms of the land, the the subtle shifts in the wind, the signs that told him where animals roamed, and when it was safe to move. The matriarch also introduced him to the children of the tribe. They were young, but they were eager to learn. The children watched Jacob carefully, their eyes filled with curiosity and respect. They followed his every move, mimicking his actions as they learned to navigate the same wilderness that had once been a foreign world to him. In turn, Jacob began to teach them what he knew: how to ride horses with skill, how to rope cattle, and how to survive in the harsh environment of the West. The bond between Jacob and the young ones grew stronger with each passing day. He became a mentor, guiding them through the ways of survival, just as the matriarch had done for him. Despite the challenges, Jacob found himself at peace with his new life. The Apache ways, though unfamiliar at first, began to make sense to him. It was a life of respect for the land, for nature, and for each other. He began to see things differently, no longer as an outsider, but as a part of something greater. One day, as Jacob and the children were returning from a hunt, they encountered a group of Apache warriors from another tribe. The warriors were tall and broad, their faces painted with vibrant colors. They spoke to the matriarch in their language, their voices low and urgent. Jacob couldn't understand what they were saying, but the tension in the air was palpable. The matriarch's face was stern, and she exchanged a few words with the warriors before turning back to Jacob. "It seems we must prepare for something," she said. "The time has come for you to learn what it truly means to be a part of the Apache." Jacob, though confused, nodded. He had come a long way since his fall into the ravine, and he knew that the matriarch's teachings had prepared him for something more. The Apache were not just survivors, they were warriors, and soon, Jacob would understand what it meant to fight for his people. The morning air was crisp as Jacob stood beside the matriarch, his eyes scanning the horizon. The warriors from the other tribe had left, but the tension still hung thick in the air. The matriarch had told him it was time to prepare for what lay ahead, and Jacob knew that his life was about to change once again. "The time has come," the matriarch had said. "The land will test you, and you must be ready." Jacob wasn't sure what she meant, but he trusted her. She had taught him everything he knew about survival in the harsh terrain of the West, and now it seemed like the real test was about to begin. The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. The matriarch took Jacob aside, explaining the urgency of the situation. There had been rumors of a large settler group encroaching on Apache land, threatening to disrupt the fragile peace they had maintained for generations. The tribe needed every warrior, every trained fighter, and Jacob's skills were now crucial. "You will not just be a teacher," she said. "You will stand with us." Jacob's heart pounded in his chest. He had learned so much from the Apache, but he had never imagined he would be called upon to fight. It was one thing to teach the children, to share the skills that had once kept him alive in the wild. It was another to face real danger, to protect the land and the people who had taken him in. For the next few days, Jacob and the warriors trained relentlessly. The matriarch led them in strategy, teaching them how to use the terrain to their advantage, how to outmaneuver their enemies and strike with precision. Jacob, though still a novice in many ways, felt the rush of adrenaline as he fought alongside the Apache. The bond between him and the warriors grew stronger, and he began to see them not just as allies, but as family. The children, too, were involved in the preparations. They were small but fierce, their eyes bright with determination. Jacob had grown fond of them, seeing their eagerness to learn, to fight, to defend their way of life. Each day, he trained them, passing on the knowledge he had gained over the past weeks. It wasn't long before the day came. The settlers had advanced, and the Apache were ready. The matriarch gave Jacob one final piece of advice as they prepared to leave the camp. "Remember what you've learned, Jacob. Do not fight out of anger. Fight to protect." As the sun rose, casting long shadows over the rugged terrain, the Apache warriors, led by the matriarch, rode out to face the settlers. Jacob, now fully immersed in the ways of the Apache, rode with them, his heart steady, his resolve firm. They rode for hours, the landscape stretching out before them like an endless sea of dust and rock. As they approached the settlers' encampment, Jacob felt his pulse quicken. The time for training was over. This was real. He was about to face the enemy. The settlers were unaware of their approach, busy preparing for another day in their makeshift town. Jacob could see the smoke rising from their fires, the movement of figures in the distance. The Apache, moving in silence, prepared to strike. "We strike at dawn," the matriarch whispered. "We are the wind, we are the earth, and we are the storm." Jacob nodded, his hand gripping the reins tightly. As the Apache warriors moved into position, Jacob couldn't help but feel a sense of unity with them. This was his tribe now. He had fought for them, trained for them, and now he would fight beside them. The silence of the desert was broken by the distant sounds of the settlers. Jacob's breath caught in his throat as the Apache warriors signaled their readiness. It was time to defend their land. Time to protect the future of the tribe. The charge was sudden, swift, and relentless. The Apache stormed into the settlers' camp, their war cries filling the air. Jacob, though nervous, found himself in the thick of the fight. His training had prepared him for this moment, and as he fought alongside the Apache, he knew that he had found his true place in the world. His loyalty was no longer to the open plains or the lonely trail. It was with these people, these warriors who had become his family. As the battle raged on, Jacob knew one thing for certain. He would never leave this land again. The battle had been swift and brutal. Jacob could still feel the adrenaline rushing through his veins as he stood over the smoldering remains of the settler camp. The Apache warriors, having made quick work of the settlers, were now gathering their things, their faces hard, their eyes focused on the future. Jacob had fought alongside them, his moves sharp and precise, the lessons of the past few weeks guiding him through the chaos. As he caught his breath, he looked over at the matriarch, who was surveying the aftermath. Her expression was stoic, but there was something in her eyes, a quiet satisfaction that came from knowing the land had been defended. "You did well," she said, her voice steady but full of pride. Jacob nodded, though he felt a knot in his stomach. The violence, the killing, it was something he wasn't sure he could ever fully accept, but the matriarch's words kept ringing in his mind. Fight to protect. The Apache, it seemed, had always fought not for conquest, but for survival. That was something Jacob understood. As the days passed, Jacob found himself more deeply embedded in the life of the tribe. His relationship with the matriarch had evolved, moving from one of teacher and student to one of mutual respect. She had shared with him not only the skills of the Apache people, but also their philosophy. How to live in harmony with the land, how to value the balance of nature, how to respect every creature, every plant, every stone. And in turn, Jacob had shared his knowledge of the outside world, his experiences as a cowboy, his skills in ranching, his knowledge of cattle and horses. Slowly but surely, he became more than just an outsider. He became a part of the Apache family. His bond with the young ones, especially the children he had taught to hunt and ride, deepened as well. They looked to him for guidance, and Jacob found himself caring for them, teaching them as if they were his own. His heart swelled with pride when he saw their progress, their eagerness to learn, their quick adaptation to the ways of the Apache. But despite the sense of belonging that Jacob had found, there was still something in the back of his mind, a feeling of unease that he couldn't shake. The settlers were still out there, still encroaching on Apache land. This victory, as important as it was, felt like a temporary solution. Jacob knew that the conflict was far from over. One evening, as Jacob sat around the fire with the matriarch and the other warriors, she spoke of the future. "The settlers will not stop," she said, her voice low and firm. "They will continue to push westward, and we must be ready for them." Jacob listened closely. He had seen firsthand the threat that the settlers posed, but he hadn't fully understood the gravity of the situation. "What will we do?" he asked, his voice steady. The matriarch looked at him, her expression unreadable. "We will fight," she said simply. "But we will also prepare. We will build alliances with other tribes. We will train our warriors to be faster, smarter, more resourceful. And we will teach our young ones to fight, to survive, to protect our way of life." Jacob nodded, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. The fight for survival was far from over. But now he had a purpose. He wasn't just fighting for the Apache or for the land. He was fighting for the future, for the children he had come to care for the family that had taken him in when he had nothing. The next few weeks were filled with more training, more preparations. Jacob worked alongside the warriors, practicing new strategies, honing his skills. He had come a long way from the man who had fallen into the ravine, uncertain of his place in the world. Now, He was a leader, a mentor, and a protector. And as he stood beside the matriarch, watching the horizon for any sign of the settlers, Jacob knew that the future of the Apache people, and his own future, was uncertain. But one thing was clear: he would fight for them, just as they had fought for him. The days following the battle had been filled with a quiet tension. Jacob had grown accustomed to the Apache ways, but the uncertainty of the future weighed heavily on him. The settlers were still out there, moving westward, encroaching on Apache lands. Every night, as the fire flickered low, Jacob found himself thinking of what the matriarch had said. We must be ready for them. The warriors had returned to their routine of training, but this time there was an edge to their movements. The matriarch was preparing them for something larger, something more significant. Jacob could see it in the way she spoke, the way she led them. She wasn't just preparing them for battle. She was preparing them for survival in a world that was changing rapidly. The sun was beginning to set on the 5th day after the battle when Jacob was summoned to the matriarch's tent. He walked through the camp, the sounds of children laughing and warriors sharpening their weapons fading as he approached. Inside the tent, the matriarch sat cross-legged, her face illuminated by the soft glow of a single lantern. She looked up as Jacob entered, her expression unreadable. "Sit," she said, motioning to the space across from her. Jacob did as instructed, his eyes meeting hers with a mix of respect and curiosity. "You've done well," she began, her voice steady. "But this is just the beginning." Jacob nodded, waiting for her to continue. "The settlers will not stop. They have already begun to bring reinforcements. More soldiers, more supplies. They will try to take our land, and they will try to force us to submit. But we will not submit. We will fight." Her words were calm, but there was an undeniable strength behind them. Jacob felt his heart beat faster. He had known that the Apache were warriors, but hearing the matriarch speak with such resolve made him realize just how far the stakes had risen. "You have trained well," she continued. "But now, you must become more than a warrior. You must become a leader." Jacob's eyes widened. He had never seen himself as a leader, especially not in a tribe as strong and united as the Apache. He had been a teacher, a protector, but not a leader. "What do you mean?" he asked. The matriarch's eyes softened, but only slightly. "I have watched you, Jacob. You have become more than just a stranger in our midst. You have earned the respect of the warriors, the children, and of me. But now, you must stand beside us as an equal, not as someone who has been saved. You are one of us now." Her words struck him like a blow. He had never fully realized just how deeply he had become intertwined with the tribe until that moment. The matriarch was right. He had fought alongside them, learned their ways, and shared in their struggles. But this, being asked to be a leader, was something entirely different. Jacob swallowed hard, trying to process the weight of her words. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," he admitted, his voice low. The matriarch regarded him for a moment, her expression unreadable. "No one is ever ready," she said finally. "But sometimes, readiness comes not from knowing everything, but from standing up when it matters. When the time comes, you will know what to do." Jacob sat silently for a long while, the weight of her words settling heavily in his chest. Outside, the camp was growing quiet as the stars began to twinkle overhead. The Apache warriors were preparing for the next fight, and Jacob knew that the time for training was coming to an end. He would have to put everything he had learned into practice. The matriarch was right. This was only the beginning. The real test was yet to come. As he left the tent, he glanced around the camp. The firelight flickered across the faces of the warriors, their eyes filled with determination. And for the first time, Jacob felt the full weight of what it meant to be one of them. He wasn't just an outsider anymore. He was part of their family, their tribe, their fight. And when the time came, he would stand beside them, ready to protect everything they had fought for. The days that followed were filled with preparations for what lay ahead. Jacob had never felt such a sense of responsibility before, but now, as he trained alongside the warriors and mentored the young ones, he could feel the weight of the future pressing down on him. The Apache matriarch had spoken the truth. He was no longer just a teacher or a stranger in their midst. He was part of their fight. And with that came the responsibility of leading, of protecting, of standing firm when the world around him seemed to shift and change. The sun was setting on the horizon one evening when the call came. The scouts had spotted movement in the distance, settlers, armed and organized, pushing farther into Apache territory. Jacob felt his pulse quicken as he met the matriarch's gaze. She nodded at him, her eyes steady and filled with the resolve that had come to define her. "It is time," she said. "Prepare yourself. We fight tomorrow." The warriors assembled that night, their faces painted with symbols of strength and protection. Jacob stood among them, his hand resting on the hilt of his knife, his mind focused on the task ahead. He had trained for this moment, had learned the Apache ways, and now he would prove himself. As the firelight flickered in the dark, the matriarch spoke. "Tomorrow, we fight not just for our land, but for our children, our future. We fight for everything that is ours." Jacob felt the weight of her words settle deep into his bones. The battle would be fierce. The settlers were determined, and they had the numbers. But the Apache had something the settlers lacked: the knowledge of the land, the strength of community, and the will to fight. As the night passed, Jacob couldn't sleep. His mind raced, thinking of the children he had taught, the warriors he had come to respect, the matriarch who had taken him in and shown him a new way of life. What if this was their last fight? What if the Apache were driven from their land, forced to flee, scattered to the winds like so many before them? He couldn't let that happen. He wouldn't. The next morning, the Apache warriors mounted their horses, their faces determined. Jacob rode beside the matriarch, his heart pounding in his chest. The land stretched before them, wild, untamed, and beautiful. It was the only home Jacob had known since the day he fell into the ravine. And now, he was going to protect it with everything he had. As they neared the settler camp, the tension in the air was palpable. Jacob could see the settlers, their camp laid out in neat rows, their men armed and prepared for a fight. They had no idea what was coming. The Apache rode in silence, moving swiftly through the trees, using the landscape to their advantage. They would strike hard, strike fast, and leave before the settlers had time to react. Jacob felt his grip tighten on his reins as the matriarch led them into position. The warriors were ready. Jacob was ready. He had trained for this moment, and now it was time to show the settlers the strength of the Apache. The signal was given, and in an instant, the Apache warriors surged forward, their war cries echoing through the trees. The settlers, caught off guard, scrambled for their weapons, but it was too late. The Apache were upon them, moving with the speed and precision of a storm. Jacob fought alongside the warriors, his movements fluid, his instincts sharp. He had become one of them, and the battle was his to fight. As the fight raged on, Jacob saw the matriarch in the thick of it, leading her warriors with skill and authority. She fought like a force of nature, her strength unmatched. Jacob admired her more than ever. She had shown him what it meant to fight for something greater than oneself, and now, he was fighting by her side. The settlers were overwhelmed. The Apache warriors fought with a fury that left the settlers no chance to retaliate. Within hours, the battle was won. The settlers were driven from Apache land, their camp destroyed, their forces scattered. Jacob stood among the warriors, his chest heaving with exertion, his heart still racing from the battle. They had won. They had defended their land, their future, and their people. The matriarch rode up beside him, her face fierce but proud. "You fought well," she said. Jacob nodded, feeling a deep sense of pride. "We fought for each other," he replied. The matriarch smiled, and for the first time, Jacob saw a flicker of something softer in her eyes. "Yes, we did. The Apache had won this battle, but Jacob knew that the fight was far from over. The settlers would not give up so easily. But for now, the land was safe, and the Apache could rest, knowing that they had fought for what was theirs. And Jacob, for the first time in his life, felt truly at home. The days following the victory over the settlers were filled with a mix of relief and uncertainty. Jacob had fought alongside the Apache, had helped defend their land, but now the question loomed: what would happen next? The settlers had been pushed back, but they were not defeated, and there was no guarantee they would not return with greater force. The Apache had won this battle, but Jacob knew the fight for their land was far from over. The matriarch, though calm and composed, was clearly aware of the looming threat. As the sun dipped below the horizon one evening, casting long shadows across the camp, she gathered the warriors around the fire. Jacob sat among them, the weight of the recent battle still heavy on his chest. "We have won today, But the enemy will not stop, the matriarch said, her voice steady. They will return. We must be ready. Jacob's mind raced. The settlers had already begun to regroup, to send word to their allies further west. It was clear that the Apache would have to face them again. The matriarch's words struck him deeply. But we will be ready, she continued. We are stronger than they think. And we are not alone. Jacob's curiosity piqued at the last part. What do you mean? He asked. The matriarch's eyes gleamed with a quiet confidence. We will form alliances. We will seek the help of other tribes. And together, we will drive them back. Jacob listened closely as the matriarch laid out her plan. She would send scouts to neighboring tribes, seeking their support in the coming conflict. The Apache could not win this battle alone. Jacob understood. He had seen the strength of the Apache, but he had also seen the might of the settlers. This would be a fight like none they had ever faced. The next few weeks were filled with travel, strategy, and preparation. Jacob traveled with the matriarch, along with several warriors, to meet with leaders of neighboring tribes. Some were hesitant, unsure of whether they should join forces with the Apache. The settlers were a powerful enemy, and not all tribes were eager to get involved in a war that might cost them everything. But the matriarch was persuasive. She spoke of the need to protect their way of life, their families, their land. And slowly, one by one, the tribes agreed to stand with the Apache. Jacob was amazed at how the Apache matriarch worked, her ability to unite people who had once been rivals. It was a skill he had never seen before. She was a leader in every sense of the word. But as they prepared to unite the tribes, Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. He had learned to fight, to survive, and to lead. But he had never faced an enemy like the settlers. The Apache had fought many battles, but this was different. The settlers were relentless, and they would stop at nothing to claim the land they wanted. As the day of the battle drew near, Jacob spent more time reflecting on the matriarch's teachings. He had learned much. From her, not just about survival, but about the importance of unity. She had shown him what it meant to be part of something larger than himself, to fight not just for land, but for a future. As Jacob sat by the fire one night, watching the flames flicker in the night air, he realized that the Apache were not just fighting to protect their land. They were fighting for their very existence. This was a fight for their culture, for their way of life, for the future of their children. Jacob had always been a loner, a cowboy who had lived by his own rules. But now he understood. This was not just a battle for survival. It was a battle for everything that mattered. The matriarch approached him, her presence as steady as the earth itself. Are you ready? She asked. Jacob looked into her eyes, the firelight reflecting in them, and nodded. I am. He had found his place among the Apache, not as an outsider, but as one of them. And when the time came, he would fight beside them, ready to defend everything they held dear. The night before the battle was filled with silence, the kind that presses in on you from all sides. Jacob sat alone by the fire, staring into the flames. The Apache warriors had gathered in their camps, preparing for the fight that would determine their future. The matriarch had already gone over the plan, and Jacob knew what was expected of him. But as he sat there, watching the fire crackle, he couldn't shake the feeling of uncertainty that had been growing in the pit of his stomach. The settlers were coming. They had been pushed back before, but this time, they were coming in greater numbers, and they were determined to take the land. The Apache had been preparing for this moment for weeks, forming alliances with neighboring tribes, training their warriors, and strengthening their resolve. Jacob had learned to fight, to survive, but this battle would be different. The stakes were higher, and there was no turning back. He looked around at the Apache warriors, all of them focused, determined, ready to defend what was theirs. But Jacob couldn't help but feel the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders. This wasn't just about defending land. It was about protecting everything they had built, everything they had fought for. He had come to understand the Apache way of life, their deep connection to the land, to each other, and to the generations that would come after them. The matriarch had taught him more than just survival. She had taught him what it meant to fight for something greater than oneself. Jacob had never imagined himself as a leader, but now, as he sat by the fire, he knew that he had become one. The matriarch had shown him the way, and now, it was up to him to stand beside her, to fight with everything he had. As the moon rose high in the sky, the sound of horses' hooves broke the stillness. The matriarch had arrived, riding toward him with a few of the warriors. Her face was illuminated by the soft light of the fire, and Jacob could see the determination in her eyes. She stopped beside him, her gaze steady. "Are you ready?" she asked. Jacob met her eyes, feeling the weight of her question. He had trained for this moment, fought alongside these people, and stood beside them in the face of danger. But this battle, was unlike anything he had ever faced. "I am," he said quietly, his voice firm. The matriarch nodded, her expression softening for a moment. "Good," she said. "We fight not for ourselves, but for the future of our people, for our children, for our way of life." Her words resonated deeply within him. This wasn't just a fight for land or survival. It was a fight for everything the Apache had worked for, everything they had believed in. As the warriors gathered around the fire, readying themselves for the battle ahead, Jacob couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. He had come so far from the man who had fallen into the ravine. He was no longer an outsider. He was one of them. He was part of the Apache. The night passed slowly, the fire burning low as the warriors prepared for the coming dawn. The silence was broken only by the occasional sound of a horse shifting or a warrior sharpening his weapon. Jacob stayed awake, his thoughts racing. He had become a part of this tribe, a part of their fight. And tomorrow, they would face the settlers together. As the first light of dawn touched the sky, the Apache warriors mounted their horses and rode out, their faces set with determination. Jacob rode alongside them, his heart steady, his mind focused. The battle was upon them, and there was no turning back. The sound of hooves pounding the earth filled the air as they rode toward the settlers. Jacob's pulse quickened, but he felt ready. The Apache had trained him well, and he would fight for them, just as they had fought for him. The battle would be fierce, but Jacob knew one thing for certain. No matter what happened, they would not back down. The Apache would stand their ground, and they would protect their land, their people, and their way of life. The battle had raged for hours, the land echoing with the sounds of conflict. Jacob had fought alongside the Apache warriors, his body aching from the exertion, his mind focused on nothing but the fight ahead. The settlers, well organized and determined, had come in force, but the Apache were ready. The land, the knowledge of the terrain, and the warrior spirit of the Apache gave them the edge. Jacob had felt the weight of every strike, every move he made. But the Apache warriors, led by the matriarch, fought with a purpose. This was their home, their legacy. As the sun began to set, the battle started to wind down. The settlers, beaten and disorganized, began to retreat, their numbers dwindling. Jacob stood among the warriors, his chest heaving, sweat dripping down his face. The victory was theirs, but the cost had been high. The matriarch, ever the steady leader, rode up to him, her eyes scanning the battlefield. She was bloodied, but her gaze remained firm, unwavering. "We have won," she said simply, her voice steady, though the toll of the battle was evident. Jacob nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. But as he looked around at the fallen warriors, both Apache and settler alike, he couldn't help but feel a pang of sorrow. "How many have we lost?" he asked. The matriarch's gaze softened, but her voice remained strong. "The cost of war is always high, but we will honor those who fought and fell. Their spirits will live on in this land." Jacob looked around, taking in the faces of the warriors, both young and old, who had fought beside him. They were tired, wounded, but they were still standing. The Apache had not only defended their land, they had defended their future. As the warriors gathered, they began to chant, their voices rising in a solemn tribute to those they had lost. Jacob stood with them, his heart heavy but filled with respect. He had become one of them, part of this tribe, part of their fight. The matriarch motioned for him to join her, and together, they rode to the center of the battlefield. The sun was dipping below the horizon, casting a golden light over the land. "This is our home," she said quietly, "and we will protect it for as long as we breathe." Jacob nodded, understanding now in a way he never had before. The Apache weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for their way of life, for the future of their children, for the land that had given them everything. The battle was over, but the war was far from finished. Jacob knew that, but for the first time, he felt a sense of peace. The Apache were not just warriors, they were a community, a family. They had fought for each other, and they had won. As the warriors began to gather their wounded and tend to the fallen, Jacob sat quietly beside the matriarch, watching as the night fell over the land. It was quiet now, the only sound the wind rustling through the trees. Jacob had come so far since that day he had fallen into the ravine, lost and alone. Now, he was part of something much greater than himself. He had found his place among the Apache, and he would fight with them, protect them, and live with them for as long as he could. The matriarch looked at him, her eyes filled with understanding. "You are one of us now," she said softly. Jacob smiled, a sense of belonging filling him as he looked out over the land they had just fought to protect. "I always have been." And as the stars began to fill the sky above, Jacob knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them with the Apache by his side. The future was uncertain, but as long as they stood together, there was hope. In this gripping tale of survival and honor, follow the journey of a cowboy who finds himself entwined with the Apache tribe after a fateful fall into a ravine. As he trains with the Apache warriors, learns their ways, and fights alongside them to protect their land, he becomes more than just a stranger. He becomes one of them. With intense battles, alliances with neighboring tribes, and a deep exploration of the Apache culture, this story is a perfect example of the power of unity and resilience in Western stories. The cowboy's transformation from an outsider to a leader, ready to face the relentless settlers, showcases the timeless appeal of Western stories. Through courage, strength, and the bond of a warrior community, he defends everything that the Apache hold dear. This narrative offers a thrilling and emotional portrayal of the frontier spirit, reminiscent of classic Western stories that have captivated audiences for generations. With fierce battles, moments of reflection, and the unyielding determination of the Apache, this tale is an unforgettable addition to the world of Western stories. The battle for survival continues in the West, where the line between friends and foes blurs, and loyalty becomes the ultimate weapon in the fight for freedom. Dive into this world of Western stories and experience the struggle for land, legacy, and the fierce will to protect one's home.